Hello, and welcome to the ELA, ELD, or our recentering of the ELA, ELD framework, our sixth session. This session is primarily about the effective expression theme. And so today's professional development or this webinar is going to focus on this theme in particular, the effective expression theme. The purpose and goal of this webinar is to recenter us around the framework, as well as share knowledge, some key knowledge around the framework, and establish a foundation for successful and sustainable implementation of the practices that are promoted throughout the framework. Before we get started, what I would like to do is I'm going to launch a poll, and I would like to see who's here, who is joining us today. Classroom teachers, paraprofessionals, librarians, specialists, family, community members, instructional coach. Are you from a school or a district administrator, county office? And if you scroll down, you'll see higher education, educational organization, or if you're from the California Department of Education or another state agency, or if you're a policymaker. So my goal is 80% participation, and it looks like we are almost there. Just a little bit more. All right, end this poll. 3, 2, so get your answers in. All right, ending the poll. Sharing the results here, you'll see that we have a lot of administrators, which is great. We need administrators in this work. We also have teachers and paraprofessionals, instructional coaches that could not do this work without you. And policymakers are also here. Individuals from higher ed and county offices, thank you for being here. And we hope that today you walk away with a lot of great information, especially that you can take away and start to use tomorrow in your classrooms. So moving along, I want to remind you that this session is a part of a bigger series. We've had a number of different sessions already starting in September, and we will continue to have them throughout the rest of the school year. So one in March, one in April, and one in May. And before I move on any further, what I would like to do is share the California Literacy webpage. And the reason why I want to quickly share it, and I will put this link in the chat in just a second, is because we have all of the webinars, all of the recordings and the materials from our previous sessions here. So I would like to go ahead and share that link with you, and this session's information will also be on there about 2 weeks after today's date. So for today, we are going to begin with our remarks. We're going to move into the overview for effective expression, and then what is effective expression in the elementary settings, what is effective expression in the middle school and high school settings, and then some time to explore, and then we will close out and talk about some next steps. Outcomes for today include understanding the big ideas regarding the effective expression theme, identifying sections in the ELA, ELD framework that guide effective expressions for TK through 12, and determine what are some next steps in using the framework to expand knowledge and enhance practices to support students' effective practices. As we move through today, we want to give you some guiding questions, some questions to guide your reflection and guide your thinking. And I also want to note that along with the link to the literacy webpage for CDE, I will share the Padlet, and we've been using a Padlet throughout these sessions to collect your reflections, to collect your thoughts. And so as our speakers are sharing the content on effective expression, feel free to post your thoughts, to post your reflections, to post your questions, anything that comes to mind. And these are some guiding questions to help you with that. So thinking about what resonates with you and what are you excited to hear? What are some key points that everyone you work with should know about? What do you want to remember? What questions do you have? And now I want to introduce our presenters for today and the co-authors of the ELA ELD framework, and see if maybe they can come off camera. It's Dr. Hallie Yop, Dr. Pam Spiescher, and Director Nancy Brendelson. And I see a few of them giving their hands and saying hi. So thank you. They will be sharing information today. Dr. Spiescher will go over the overview. Dr. Hallie Yop will go over the elementary, and Director Brendelson will talk about middle school and high school. So thank you. Superintendent is unable to make it today, but he wants to make sure that we also thank you for your time being here and appreciates that you are also focusing on literacy and ensuring that our students are reading by third grade and beyond. As I noted a bit ago, I'm going to share a link to the California Literacy webpage. I will also share a link to the Padlet. And remember to use that link for the Padlet to post your questions, comments, anything that you think of that would be good to share on that Padlet. And so now I want to go ahead and introduce Dr. Spiescher.
Thank you, Bonnie, and good afternoon, everyone. It is so great to know that you're all here. We do know that there's a lot of competition for your time. We know you're all very, very busy people doing amazing work out there. So thank you for investing your valuable time in today's session. We're excited to have you here. So as Bonnie mentioned, I'm going to provide just a brief overview of the effective expression theme, focusing on chapter 2, which introduces the themes and basically is sort of an entree into the entire framework. But before I do that, and Bonnie, if you could go to the next slide, I just want to make sure that if anybody is new today, or if you're still familiarizing yourself with this graphic, which is called the circles of implementation, I just want to provide a very brief overview of it. So this is, again, as I said, this is the ELA ELD Framework Circles of Implementation figure. It's kind of a mouthful, but it's really about supporting implementation. So that's why it's called the circles of implementation. And really what it is it's representing the framework in a nutshell. So it's a great anchor to have with you to kind of reflect on periodically and kind of see where you are. It's like a roadmap, anchor, whatever your favorite metaphor is. To kind of keep you tethered to the work. But just briefly, the outer ring, that orange ring, that displays the overarching goals for ELA, literacy in the disciplines, and ELD instruction. Actually, not just instruction, but instruction assessment and instructional materials. And these goals are that all California students will be broadly literate with 21st century skills by the time they graduate high school, and that they're ready to pursue whatever college and career path that they choose, and that they're also prepared to be an informed and active participant in our democracy. So that's the goal that we have, that we're all working together to achieve. So that's our goals. But so how do we get there? So the white field represents the instructional context that creates the conditions for us to achieve our goals. So it's within this context that we can move together toward these goals. All instructional contexts for all students in California should be motivating, engaging, respectful of students' varied and multiple identities, intellectually challenging, and integrated. And dare I say, fun and playful. we definitely need more joy, playfulness, and fun in all of our lives. And so I kind of tend to think of playful learning and joyful learning as motivating, engaging. At the center of the graphic are our ELA literacy and ELD standards, which are basically the expectations that we have of all students. And these are expectations that we know that all students can achieve if we provide them with the high quality, assessment informed, culturally and linguistically sustaining, inclusive, and whole child educational experience. That is their educational right. So the standards kind of keep us focused. They keep us focused on these agreements that we're making about these expectations. So circling the two sets of standards, because remember, standards are just their expectations, but they don't tell us how to teach. Circling the two sets of standards are the cross-cutting themes, the 5 cross-cutting themes that guide our implementation of the standards or guide us to address the standards in our instruction and assessment and instruction materials. So today we are exploring the effective expression theme. So on the next slide, just to illustrate what effective expression entails, I want to invite you to think about this concrete example. So this is a real example from a high school ELA, or English, subject matter English, unit on human impact on climate change. And the final assignment for this unit is, and it's like a 4 or 5 week long unit, but the final assignment is for students to write an argument in the style of an op-ed article recommending a state or federal policy related to a climate change issue that they research and that they're interested in. And then a second assignment is to write and orally present a speech in the style of a TED Talk based on their written argument. So this is pretty sophisticated. It's pretty sophisticated stuff that we're asking our students, but great stuff for them to be able to think about and do. So just think to yourself, what does a high school student need to learn to be able to effectively express themselves in these two assignments? Just take a second to think about it or jot down some ideas if you'd like to. And it doesn't have to be a long list, just 1 or 2 things. But on the next slide, here are some things that you may have noted in your head or you may have jotted down, is that students need to, well, first of all, they need to learn content knowledge. So they need to learn about climate change and about what state and federal policies are and what they do. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. They need to learn how to do research. They need to learn how to read analytically. They need to learn how to talk through their ideas to expand them and gain nuances and stretch their thinking and sort them out. They need to learn how to develop their own positions and have a perspective on important issues. And obviously, they need to learn how to write an effective argument. They need to understand what claims, evidence, and reasoning means in the context of an argument. They need to understand the text structure and organization of an argument. They need to have some register awareness, so they're aware of how to talk to their audience or how to express themselves effectively to their intended audience, a specific audience. They need to understand rhetorical devices and also have the language resources necessary for constructing a good argument. So there's a lot more that goes into crafting an effective argument, but those are some of the things. But because this assignment is about 2 specific kinds of arguments, they also need to learn how to write an effective op-ed. It's a very specific kind of argument, and how to write an effective TED Talk, which is an oral presentation. And finally, they also need to learn how to deliver an effective TED Talk. So that's a lot to learn, but think of it. If we can help support all of our students to get to that point where they can do those 2 things, they're going to be in a great position to make those life choices that they want to make when they graduate from high school. So unfortunately, and on the next slide, what sometimes happens on the next slide is that this is just traditional education. Sometimes what happens for students is that there's a big investment in students reading articles, watching videos, doing research, basically developing that rich content knowledge, which is so essential. But often there's a missed opportunity for students to actually critically analyze the text that they're reading to develop that content knowledge for specifically for the qualities that make those texts so effective. So the missed opportunity is not just reading the articles and learning how to do close reading and analytical reading, but really picking those texts apart to see what makes them work, what makes them effective. And typically there's also a smaller investment in student-led discussions. So where students are learning how to facilitate their own dialogue around these issues. And also there's a smaller investment in really making those transparent, those expectations that we have for students for their writing explicit and transparent. And that's the way I was educated. That's the way, that's traditional education. So in the framework, and specifically in the effective expression theme, we really wanted to offer guidance for making a significant investment in all of those activities in an integrated way. So on the next slide, here's the big picture with the effective expression theme, which you've probably been picking up. The 4 big areas of this theme across the framework are writing, discussing, presenting, and using language conventions. In chapter 2, which is what I'm mostly talking about, particular attention is paid to writing and to the special role of discussion. And what's essential to remember, which you probably picked up on the previous slide, is that effective expression happens through the reciprocal nature of reading, writing, discussing, presenting, signing, if that's your way of communicating, visual communication, body language, and more. So it's this interactive process, this reciprocal process that is not happening in isolation. So here we go. On the next slide, I also kind of like to throw in the wisdom of effective communicators in the world. And this is one of my favorite authors, Tony Hillerman. And I professional authors understand this. So Tony Hillerman says the best way to learn to write is by reading critically, noticing paragraphs that get the job done, achieving the author's goals, how your favorite writers use verbs, all the useful techniques. Scene catches you, go back and study it, find out how it works. And so that's what a lot of what we're talking about in the instruction of how to, of effective instruction is this integral and integrated process of reading and writing and speaking and listening, discussing, researching, all of this stuff. So it's complex, but we can do it. So on the next slide, this is what you will find in chapter 2. This is oh, good. Somebody's saying they enjoy Hillerman's books too. They're great. So if you haven't read any of Tony Hillerman's books, please go and check them out. So teaching students how to write effectively requires a couple of things, at least. It requires guiding their exploration of how the language and the rhetorical moves in effective text work, just like Tony Hillerman was saying. And it also requires, obviously, supporting students to apply that knowledge, the knowledge that they are developing through those analyses and through those discussions. So this is where mentor texts come in. And we've talked about mentor texts in previous webinars if you've been here. Mentor texts are so powerful because they are, well, I guess a simple definition is that they're well-written texts that provide a model for writing for students to aspire to when they go to do their own writing. And so students, when they analyze these texts, they are learning how to identify what an author says, how they are saying it, what the author's goals are, because it's not always clear what the author's goals are, but when you analyze the text, you can learn to decipher that. They are learning about specific language moves and language goals, potentially, that the author had in writing. And when they discuss their analyses with their peers and teachers, they're really expanding their thinking. So we learn a lot more by talking about our thinking with others than we do by just talking about our thinking in our heads. And that's one of the reasons why discussion is so important, which is a companion of writing. And students also learn how to write through writing. So they they're exploring their own capabilities as writers. So they need to write in different genres and subgenres, like an op-ed. They need to learn how to consciously and intentionally choose language and rhetorical devices. They need to learn how to give and get feedback, because that will help them grow as writers, and also use explicit criteria, like success criteria for writing is what we're talking about now. And they also need to learn how to be reflective writers, so reflecting on and revising their own text for specific reasons, not just because somebody took a red pen and marked it up, but for to make it more powerful and to grow as writers. So on the next slide, so you're going to find all of that sort of elaborated upon, but I want to just give you another teaser. So it's sort of a teaser for chapter 2 to kind of hopefully inspire you to get in there. You'll also find some specific guidance for supporting our EL identified students in their writing development, and that is through integrated and designated ELD. And as you know, integrated and designated ELD is both an infrastructure, but also importantly, the specific use of the ELD standards. And so there's parts in chapter 2 that kind of guide you through doing that. So you're going to find examples in chapter 2, but Nancy and Hallie are also going to elaborate on this. This is just a teaser, as I said. So the other big focus on the next slide of chapter 2 is on the special role of discussion. I've talked about discussion already as I've been talking about writing, because they do go hand in hand along with reading. But you will find a clear message in this section, and that is that that message is that talk is how learning happens. We learn by talking and exploring our ideas with others. As I said, you learn a lot more by engaging in discussion with others about topics than just by engaging with yourself in your head, because other people know stuff. Typically, they know stuff that we don't know, or both of you maybe are exploring the same new learning together, and you both get to learn that new thing together. But we just grow more when we talk with others about what we're learning. So in order for that proficient, those proficient discussion skills to develop, teachers do very specific things. They provide daily and frequent opportunities for students to engage in discussions, and that can be uncomfortable initially, but over time it grows to be more comfortable. And they teach students how to engage in discussions by providing protocols, modeling, having discussion norms, and structuring discussions, so students really understand what is expected of them, and then so they can flourish in the discussion. And then they plan great questions that students are interested in talking about, and they consider the physical environment. It's really hard to talk with people if you're sitting in rows. So the first thing I look for when I walk into a classroom is, are the tables structured or the desks structured so that students can actually talk to each other a lot, in a quick way. And then the grouping for talking is flexible. Students are getting to talk to a lot of different students, so that there's equitable participation. So on the next slide, you probably picked up there that scaffolding, there's a lot of scaffolding going on there. So scaffolding is key. And this is one of my favorite figures in chapter 2. It's figure 2.15, structures for engaging all students in academic conversations. It's a very popular figure. This isn't even all of it. I think there's even more. But I really like this. I frequently go back to this when I'm developing curriculum, when I'm developing materials to use in the classroom, because it's a great reminder of all the different ways you can get kids to talk, and it's fun. Students love this. So that's available for you to go check out. And on the next slide, just as another reminder, that providing specialized support for our multilingual learners who are identified as English learner students, or EL identified students, specialized scaffolding, specialized support is critical through the use of the ELD standards and through the infrastructure of integrated and designated ELD. So you can see on the screen an excerpt from chapter 2 offering some ideas on providing scaffolding for discussion. So I hope this little teaser got you excited about hearing more from Hallie and Nancy, and about diving into some specific parts of chapter 2. And with that, I will hand it back to you, Bonnie.
Thank you, Dr. Speaker. I appreciate you sharing that overview and providing some strategies that are going to be useful. And I know I want to make sure that I remind folks that we have the Padlet in the chat and as well as another link, but the Padlet. So if you heard something that resonated with you, that was just shared, please post it there. There is a little section or a little posting that I put on the Padlet that's pinned that says coming soon. And that is because in just a little bit, we're going to have some time to explore the guidance document for effective expression. So that is there. You're going to have a few minutes to, you'll have some time. Please take time now to go ahead and reflect on that that Padlet. And that Padlet does look like this. So right now it says coming soon, and that's where that will be. But please feel free to post. You go ahead and you can write in your comment and publish. So without further ado, I'm going to move us forward to Dr. Yop. And Dr. Yop is going to share with us some information regarding effective expression regarding elementary school, or effective expression in elementary schools and the instruction for that. So I'm going to ask Dr. Yop to come on.
Hello.
Hi. So Dr. Yop, considering what Pam shared, how does this play out in the elementary school?
Thank you, Dr. Garcia, and thanks, Dr. Speaker, for sharing so many of the key points that we wrote about in Chapter 2. And everything you said is what shows up throughout the rest of the framework. And yes, Bonnie, I will address some things specifically for elementary, but also share some of the research that informed, because part of creating a framework is drawing on what the research is about good practice, implementation, what we know about children, and so forth. So I'd like to start with the first slide, which is just a reminder of what Pam commented on earlier and what we keep sharing in our other webinars. And it's just a reminder of our vision of implementation of ELA, literacy, and ELD standards. If you've been joining us, you've seen this many times, and we hope it provides guidance. In a quick eyeball view, are you seeing what we're thinking about implementation here in the state of California on these standards? Past webinars, in addition to other topics, have addressed 3 of the 5 themes. We've done foundational skills, we've talked about language development and meaning making. And these themes, as you've heard us say, cut across the strands of the standards, and they overlap with one another. Therefore, you will see some overlap in our webinars. Some of the things we talked about discussion today, and I will be talking about, we talked about in language development, and we talked about in the meaning making webinar. I'd like to start with this first slide, this next one, Bonnie, if you don't mind, thank you, by talking about effective expression in the context of reading as we guide children to become aware of the author's craft. We are doing this throughout the elementary school years, starting with when we first get those kiddos here in our environments with us. We see reading standards that students examine, that have students examining the author's craft as they engage with text. Attention is given to how authors use language, how they use text structures, how they use images for different purposes, perhaps to convey information, or to entertain, or to evoke responses, or to influence readers in some way. As they read aloud or together with children, teachers highlight the author's work. For example, children, when they smile and giggle at one of Shel Silverstein's poems, or feel anger at Rosa Parks' experience, or are they stirred by action by Linda Sue Parks' A Long Walk to Water, teachers comment on the students' reactions and on their own reactions, and they look into the book with students at how authors led us to those reactions. They comment, oh, listen, notice the words they used. Notice how they explain this. They comment on word choice, on images, on organization, and they display enthusiasm for the author's decisions because they are decisions. The author has made choices, and those choices have an impact on us. So teachers engage in think alouds, whether they're reading aloud to our youngest children, whether kids are reading books together, a similar book, whether there's some conversation going on about it. We're thinking aloud as teachers. What did the author do here? What do you suppose the author was working on to make us feel? How did they do that? Wow, listen to this passage. I have to repeat this. There's a lot of enthusiasm for looking at the author as playing a role in what we are reading. The framework provides guidance regarding supporting students' awareness of the craft. For example, on this slide, there is an image of a snapshot from chapter 4. Third graders share with one another what they've identified as powerful passages from Jewel Parker Road's 9th Ward. And they circulate around the room. They share the passage they selected, and they explain to their peers the reason for the selection. They're examining the work, and they're talking about the work and the author's craft. Next slide, please. I'd just like to quickly comment that we also think of fluency as part of effective expression. Although discussed under the theme of foundational skills in the framework, it belongs with this theme as well. Teachers model reading aloud fluently a variety of text types. They vary their pace and they use expression appropriate for the text. They're modeling effective reading. They may model and prompt children to change their expression to read sentences as if they're happy or frightened or angry. That's my baseball bat. That's my baseball bat. That's my baseball bat. So children have the opportunity to think about just how they're expressing a sentence conveys meaning as well. And the second bullet here is children have regular opportunities to read aloud individually as part of building fluency. They read aloud individually and chorally after rehearsal in both those cases, of course. They practice in order to give an effective, entertaining, meaningful performance. We've noted here that reading aloud is treated as a joyful community building process as children share their own work or engage in a performance such as, say, Reader's Theater, for others live in the classroom, or perhaps virtually, or perhaps shared as an audio or video recording. Next slide, please. Now we move into writing. Writing begins in the early school years. Indeed, research has suggested that students should develop writing, an early foundation in writing, and that students who develop strong writing skills at an early age acquire a valuable tool for learning, for communication, and for self-expression. Thus, writing instruction and opportunities are not delayed, and they're certainly not just about copying one's names or sight words. In fact, the writing standards 1 through 3 in kindergarten call for students to use a combination of drawing, dictating, and writing to compose a variety of genres, to tell a story, to convey an opinion, to convey information. And students continue to work toward writing effective narratives, opinions, and informative pieces through the grades. These quotes are drawn from the report of a research panel. Next slide. And here are some of the recommendations from that report. Reviewing research on effective writing instruction in the elementary years, the panel concluded the following: that we provide daily time for students to write. In fact, the panel has said there's evidence to suggest that a minimum of 1 hour a day should be devoted to writing. Beginning in first grade, kindergarten, they say 30 minutes at least. That hour in those elementary schools a day should include at least 30 minutes dedicated to teaching a variety of writing strategies, techniques, skills appropriate to students' levels. And the remaining 30 minutes should be spent writing, practice, where students apply the skills they're learning. They have time for writing, and that time for writing practice, of course, can and should occur in the context of other content area instruction. In science, for example, children write or dictate, in the case of our younger learners, descriptions of observations they've made in a scientific exploration, or perhaps steps in a process of looking at some data. Importantly, children are provided many exemplars of high quality written language. Pam commented on the value of mentor texts previously. Those texts, mentor texts, are crucial resources for developing effective writers. A second recommendation from this panel that explored the research was that we teach students to use the writing process and for a variety of purposes. They plan what and how to approach that writing. They learn to draft, they share, they receive feedback, they revise and edit and publish. Even our kindergartners are asked, with guidance and support from teachers, of course, to strengthen, to respond to questions and suggestions from peers, and to add details to strengthen writing as needed. And that continues up through the grades. And not doing all of the processes, of course, the writing processes for every piece of written work. We're not doing that, of course, for every piece. Sometimes we just write drafts and we keep them in a folder and we select one later that we really want to develop and refine and publish because it matters to us, because we care about that one. We resonated with that one so much that that's the one that we really want to develop. But lots of drafts are developed during those 1 hour periods a day across the school day, not just this is 10 to 11, but this is throughout, cumulative throughout the school day, that an hour is spent on writing according to the recommendations drawn from research. A third recommendation here is that we teach students to become fluent with handwriting, spelling, sentence construction, typing, word processing, keyboarding is what we say it was said in the standards. The aim is that these basic skills become more effortless so that students can focus on developing and communicating their ideas through writing. And recommendation 4 from this panel is that we create an engaged community of writers. Teachers write. They share their writing with their kids, their students. They give students writing choices. They encourage students to collaborate as writers. They encourage students to listen to one another's written work and comment on it and share with one another. And all of this takes place in that context that we display in the circles of implementation graphic, one that's integrated across all the curriculum, one that's engaging, that's motivating, and that is respectful of children, who they are, where they're coming from, what their experiences are, what their language is, and so forth. Next slide shows some resources that we provide in the framework. The framework provides examples of grade level writing, and with annotations. Displayed here is a kindergarten one, and I believe it's a 4th grade one there with the annotations. We also have figures. We also have instructional suggestions in the text, the body of the framework. We also have snapshots and vignettes that show instruction in action. Our guidance document, shared shortly, will direct you to many of these resources. The snapshot there is about sentence combining, and it is integrated with art as students are looking at Grant Wood's painting, American Gothic. And they're looking at the art, and then they're doing some sentence combining related to that. Lots of resources in the framework. Next slide, please, Pam. Funny. Discussing too. Pam shared some of the resources from the framework about discussions. Here I'll share recommendations, once again, from the research regarding effective discussions that can guide our work with students and that are reflected in the framework. Recommendations include that when we're writing in response to text, it's compelling text. It's one worth spending time with, wrestling with the ideas and so forth, one's worth discussing. That we prompt thinking with higher order questions, not simplistic low-level questions, literal questions, that we ask follow-up questions as kids are engaged with one another, that we have students lead structured small group discussion. Yes, students themselves engaged in leading some of those discussions. And on the next slide, we show resources. Just like writing, discussions should be daily and frequent. And this is especially important for our EL identified students. This slide shows 2 of the many figures we provide in the framework. Figure 330, 3.30 offers questions and sentence starters to promote responses to and building on the comments of others. And figure 5.12, just partial here, shares descriptions of the roles that students might play in structured small group discussions. On the next slide, as Pam said, these are all overlapping. These are all integrated with one another. Reading, writing, and discussion are related, and they're most effective when intertwined. Research shows that the following on this slide are related to comprehension of text. That when we write extended responses to text, yes, in elementary schools, Yes, when we write summaries about a text, when we take notes, when we receive writing instruction, when we increase the amount of writing, and when we engage in high quality discussions, all of these impact reading comprehension and should be swirling around one another constantly throughout the time that the children are in our classes, students up through 5th grade, and Nancy will shortly tell you, and all the way through high school. My final 2 slides are, I'm just talking about presenting very briefly. So the next slide, you see here too, the assertion that even in the earliest grades, children begin to build the skills needed for effective presentation for knowledge and skills. Because presenting, by the way, requires, as you probably recognize, the use of more formal language than discussion. There's a change in register even. It's a heightened aware of audience. It demands preparation. We argue it should be safe and affirming. Students should have choices. In the early grades, it might include a show and tell time with photograph or a favorite object, or perhaps anywhere up the grades, a retelling or poetry recitation, a reader's theater, spoken word performances, how-to explanations. The standards call for children to present, and these can be engaging, empowering, and positive experiences for kids, not ones that are simply dutiful or worse, intimidating. Again, we refer you to the context of instruction that we assert should be occurring. And finally, language conventions. These are discussed in the effective expression sections of the framework. Here we call out the importance of spelling as well as printing and cursive. The aim is that these basic skills become more effortless so we can focus on more meaningful engagement with text, with ideas, with learning, with knowledge. Spelling is in grades 5, occurs throughout grades K through 5 in the language standards. Printing is in grades K and 1. Cursive is currently in grades 3 and 4, and legislation is moving forward to add it to some of the other grade levels as well. In short, effective expression is multifaceted, and it certainly begins in the elementary schools. Bonnie.
Thank you, Dr. Yap. And in the chat, I'm putting the link to the Padlet once again. I just want to note that there is some really good discussion right now around, and I have to refresh, that's what's happening here, around the importance for discussions and bringing those up in the classroom and writing, and how there needs to be more reading for there to be more and better writing. So thank you for that. Please keep posting your reflections and your comments as we go through. I am now going to move us into effective expression in middle school and high school. So I'm moving it over to Director Brennelson, who's going to talk to us about how all of this applies in the secondary setting. Nancy?
Thank you, Bonnie, and thank you, Pam and Hallie, for your overview and a discussion of effective expression at the elementary level. And you're going to hear several of the things that they both mentioned reflected in what I will be talking about in the next bit. So next slide. So effective writing, this is a quotation right from the framework, writing that is appropriate to the task, purpose, and audience is the result of instruction, practice, and feedback. And I point out this task, purpose, and audience because we really begin to focus more on that as students move into their middle school and high school years, with the eventual goal of moving on to college or career. And particularly like this quotation from the framework for success in post-secondary writing. The ability to write well is basic to student success in college and beyond. Students can become better writers when they have multiple opportunities to write in classes across the curriculum throughout their education, from elementary school through university. So writing as one of the major components of effective expression is something that should be happening across the grades and across the curriculum, as both Pam and Hallie said. Next slide. So some of the key things that are important at these levels, they were also important earlier, but I'll comment on them here, is writing in response to text, often multiple texts. As students move through the grades, they are called on more frequently to have texts in conversation with one another and to consider the perspectives across texts, informing their own opinions and now arguments. Analyzing the effectiveness of authors' use of language, text structure, rhetorical devices such as ethos, pathos, and logos, and more. So a key point in effective expression is not just producing writing, discussion, presentations, but it's also being aware of what makes something effective and doing that deep kind of analysis. That leads us to the use of mentor texts, as Pam talked about, using those as models for how we might craft our own arguments, our own discussions of information or narratives. Collaborating, discussing, and giving and receiving feedback are critically important. So you see writing overlaps a great deal with discussion. And it is important for students to learn to give one another feedback and to understand what's effective about their own writing and their peers, and for teacher input in that process. Frequently, and you've heard this already, writing formally and informally. So as both Pam and Helly said, we're not always writing a big report or doing research, but we also use writing on a daily basis to process what we're learning. Key here, it's the volume of writing. And I would also say the volume of reading that's going to make the difference in terms of student outcomes. Next slide. Some research for you, some of which is in the framework and some is a bit newer than that. Steve Graham is well known for his work in writing, and he has a practice guide that is published on the What Works Clearinghouse. And he has 3 major recommendations, and he goes into much more detail in the document, but explicitly teach appropriate writing strategies using a model, practice, reflect instructional cycle. Integrate writing and reading to emphasize key writing features, and use assessments of student writing to inform instruction and feedback, much of which you've heard already in what we've been presenting about writing. In the framework, we gave you some examples from Writing Next, effective strategies to improve writing of adolescents. So there were the 11 features there of effective writing. So that is for your edification and to really show how we've reflected the research in both the framework and in these presentations. Next slide. We wanted to highlight for you in these webinars resources. So there are framework resources. You see a snapshot, the table here with the text and the analysis of the text is an excerpt from a snapshot in chapter 6, which is grades 6, 7, and 8, where there's a deep analysis of how the language is working and what it's meaning. That kind of analysis is part of what goes into making us effective writers. A bit later in chapter 7, we see a device for analyzing the effectiveness of an argument, the rhetorical methods and strategies, and you'll hear it repeated over and over: audience, purpose, and in this case, argument and persona. In other words, what is the author's ethos or the author's expertise on the topic? But I'd like to call your attention to some other resources that you may have already heard of. There is a set of high-impact strategies, a toolkit to support students in ERWC classrooms. They were originally designed to support EL-identified students, but I think you'll find broad applicability in the categories that you see here. So that is hot linked, and we would recommend that you take a look. Moving on then to the next slide, we look at the other component of effective expression, as both Pam and Hallie talked about discussing. There are framework resources, many different sentence starters, protocols. Here's one, figure 6.12, small group rules for nonfiction discussions. And then also a table, a figure, if you will, 7.9, overview of dialogic instruction. The whole idea that it's give and take, and that questions are open-ended, and we're engaging in authentic intellectual practice as we discuss what we read, what we view, and what we hear. Again, I'll call your attention to another resource, the High Impact Strategies Toolkit, and there are sections on discussion norms and academic discussion protocols you can use in your classroom tomorrow. And next slide. So we'll move on to presenting. You know, California, when we were adopting the Common Core State Standards for English Language Arts and Literacy, made a special point of augmenting the standards in speaking and listening to emphasize presentations that students would be asked to make across a number of really text types or genres. So you'll see in the standards there, students presenting claims and findings in grades 6 through 8, and as they move into high school, presenting information, findings, and supporting evidence. Also, coupled with that standard 4 is standard 5, including and integrating multimedia and visual displays in middle school, and making strategic use of digital media in high schools. So these standards fit together, as many of our standards do. And it's important to show the parallel with the ELD standards for grades 6 through 12 in Part 1, Standard 9, planning and delivering oral presentations and reports, and those progress over time as students move through the proficiency levels and also through the grades. So you see here in this call-out box, for the first time, students are expected to delineate a speaker's argument and specific claims, distinguishing claims that are supported by reasons and evidence from claims that are not. Students present claims and findings in argument, narrative, informative, and response to literature presentations on a regular basis in grade 6. So this is just highlighting for you sort of the turn that we make in grade 6 to focus on argument and more sophisticated approaches to evidence and claims. And finally, moving on to using language conventions. Now, much of what we talked about in our language development webinar was around students acquiring vocabulary as well as grammatical understandings and syntax, but using that understanding of language in the conventions is really, as we write and as we present, important for creating our own ethos as an author or presenter. So you see here that in the standards for ELA, standard 1 across the board is the conventions of grammar and usage. And standard 2 is capitalization, punctuation, and spelling in writing. We know that these skills are best developed in context through frequent practice, teacher feedback, and editing, as opposed to revising. And teacher feedback because we want the teacher's eyes on some of these more technical aspects. But it's important to note that our use of conventions will vary as appropriate for our purpose, our audience, our task or argument, the author's persona, what we want to communicate about ourselves as the writer, and genre expectations. So these are not always fixed, but being in command of these conventions will support a student's growth. There are a couple of figures that I'll point out that are one in chapter 6 and one in chapter 7 about language standards from earlier grades that teachers may need to reinforce. So, as we know, language development and particularly command over conventions develops over time and will be something to keep an eye on. So, taken together and integrated, those 4 components, writing, discussing, presenting, and using language conventions, get to the heart of what is effective expression in middle school and high school.
Thank you, Nancy, for that. And I hope that, and I've seen people posting on the Padlet throughout your presentation, as well as Dr. Yop's and Pam's. So I want to encourage you to continue to do that. I'm putting in the chat right now links to the Padlet again, and then a link to the effective expression document. Again, thank you for the overview, the information on effective expression in elementary as well as in the secondary setting. What does that look like and how can we make it happen? So this is an opportunity now for you to dive into more on effective expression and resources and documents relative to the framework and specifically for the theme of effective expression. So again, in the chat, and I'll show this to you in a second, you're going to open the effective expression theme guidance document, and you're going to choose a grade level or a topic that you're interested in. You're going to click away, go through that, explore, and then post a reflection in the Padlet. So let me share with you what that looks like. Here we have the Padlet, and then here is the effective expression guidance document. You'll notice that it is also linked here in the Padlet. You'll have information on exactly where you can find effective expression within the different chapters. So chapter 2, chapter 3, all the way to chapter 10. And so it'll give you snapshots, specific sections to look at. Also, if you look down, there are the guiding documents for the other webinars that we have had. And again, those you can find on our California Literacy webpage. And under webinars, you'll be able to find the recordings, the presentation slides, and the guiding document. So below that, you will also find resource links for the framework and other related documents. So you'll have the framework, the summary, the resource guide, which is a great document on foundational skills, figures, vignettes, snapshots, specific landing and resource pages, as well as other related resources. So it's a lot of really great information here. And with that, I'm going to refresh. And I'm going to ask Dr. Yop, Director Brenelson, Dr. Spiescher, if you want to unmic or come back on and reflect on anything that you're seeing from these postings. One thing that I particularly like is this acknowledgement to the connecting reading to your text. Connecting reading to your writing. And, you know, rather than giving a prompt that has nothing to do with anything we just learned, how are we making that connection with diving deeper into the material, into the content, really learning? And so I'm going to give you guys just a second. I do see that there are 2 hands raised. I've seen these, and I am unable to, because of the way that this webinar is set up, have folks on mic. So I'm going to encourage you to please pop your questions into the Q&A, and the Q&A is found at the very bottom bar next to the chat, and also participant information. So all of those on the bottom, you'll notice the Q&A there. So please write your questions there, and we will do our best to answer them. So Nancy, I see you've unmiked.
Well, I just wanted to make a comment about the integration of all of the things we've been talking about to date: reading, language development, vocabulary, foundational skills with this theme, and how all the components of this theme are integrated together. And it's very consistent with what is presented in the circles of implementation. So that's just something that occurs to me as important, is how we integrate all of these things while keeping track of what it is that students have learned and what they still need to learn.
But it's not just, they're not in silos, everything's integrated, goes together. I don't know if Pam or Hallie, you had anything to add?
I was just, I love listening to Hallie and Nancy, of course. But I was reminded as they were talking, and this is something I like to think about myself, about how powerful dialogic teaching is. So it's such a departure from what many of us grew up with, which was sort of sitting and listening. And, you know, there's an art to sitting and listening. That's not a bad thing. But the dialogic teaching is so powerful because, as Nancy pointed out, it's a conversation about learning, rather than a presentation of what students should learn. And so I think it's important not to underestimate the complexities of dialogic teaching. It's not easy. It's you really have to be on your toes, know your students, know your curriculum, know what kinds of questions to ask. But when you get the hang of it, and when you practice it, and learn through your flubs and mistakes, because nobody's perfect, it's a beautiful thing, because you're having a conversation and you're providing openings and pathways and opportunities for students to really let you into their thinking. And so just wanted to make another pitch for that dialogic teaching, for people to kind of explore that concept a bit more.
Anything to add, Dr. Yap?
I'm watching the Padlet, and I'm hoping that people are using that guidance document and going into a chapter of their interest. If you teach in primary grades, go in there and go to the page numbers to see some of the resources. And there, this document is huge. It's about 1,000 pages, and that can be overwhelming. But one of the things that we've tried to do for each one of these webinars is to provide a guidance document that takes you to the conversations about this theme, takes you to the resources related to it, the snapshots or the figures and so forth. And it took a lot of effort for us to write it, and we wanted to make it meaningful for all of you. And to the extent that you actually can navigate through some of this by having been to some of these webinars, we'll feel very pleased. And I do appreciate some of the comments that are being made here on the Padlet right now. But if you've spotted something in the guidance document that you want to comment on to direct some of your colleagues to who are here, that would be terrific.
Thank you. And yes, I just really like the organization of each one of these documents and how specific it is to the theme and the grade level, and encourage you to share these documents and resources with other educators and professional learnings, PLCs, all of those opportunities.
Oh, I'll just make a comment, because I appreciate, somebody made a comment. Sorry, I have to toggle back and forth between Zoom and the Padlet. Somebody made a comment from chapter 3. It's a quote that says, "The main instructional emphasis in designated ELD in transitional kindergarten through grade 1 is oral language development, including collaborative conversations and vocabulary." And that is true. I get a lot of questions about should we be teaching foundational skills in designated ELD? And the general answer is no, because we really want that special time, that protected time, to be to have an emphasis on children being able to express themselves effectively and have conversations. And because that's, remember, talk is how learning happens. So it supports equitable participation when young children can engage in those extended conversations. And so that's one of the reasons why. Now, there are going to be some exceptions every once in a while, but the general answer is no. Please use that time for primarily for oral language development, and this dialogic teaching, talking about how texts work. That's also, you know, part of effective expression, as we've been saying. It's all integrated.
I want to add, I noticed the long quote that somebody put on there. Thank you. I'm glad that you like that. And it's very much the message that we're trying to send, is those kinds of purposes, igniting the curiosity and so forth. So, and even in young children, somebody else teaches TK, yes. And I know a lot of people stop while they're reading and ask questions and so forth. But I think this whole notion of doing so as part of effective expression is heightening the attention that we turn toward it. And how did they do that? How did that? We laughed. What did Shel Silverstein do here that made us laugh? And I remember reading with my son when he was in high school. We were reading a book, and both of us started having tears streaming down our faces. And I stopped and I said, oh, wow. And I said, you know, I just have to go back and figure out how we got here, because, you know, some authors can just say the dogs died, right? But other authors get us there in ways that are just wrenching, right? And very moving. And what did they do? Stop even in TK and say, wow, look at how the author did that. Oh, and look how you did it when you were dictating a story to us. Fantastic.
Can I make one more comment? Because I do appreciate the person who commented on the importance of engaging our students in engaging in rigorous conversations about themselves and their lives and their own identities and their literacy and linguistic identities. You know, all of these, everything that this person wrote, thank you very much, is such an important part of this conversation. And we've talked about culturally and linguistically sustaining practices before in these webinars. And you know, I just want to encourage you to continue to look for those examples throughout the framework. Thank you for commenting on that.
I'm going to go back really quickly to the comments just around the discussions and how important it is to allow students the opportunity to talk, for there to be more student to student talk, or student to teacher talk. And, you know, teachers need to talk too, but we need to give our students the opportunity to talk, to develop that skill. So just want to emphasize that I really like that comment.
And I
And I
think
know we're coming.
I was just going to add one more thing. Sorry, Bonnie.
Yeah, no, yes.
I think we overlook the power of discussion as pre-writing, as planning for the presentations we're going to make, and how by collaborating and communicating, students can come to realizations. And then when they sit down to do that formal planning on their own, they have some of those conversations in mind. So again, all of what we've talked about today has multiple purposes and can support students in many ways. Thank you.
And I'll just add once again that graphic, you know, instead of thinking about all the standards that are here for my grade level, and I remember counting once all the standards that were for kindergarten or first grade just in ELA, and there were something like 71. And that counted all the A, B, C, D, E, F, G's behind some of them. And that can be absolutely overwhelming. But if you realize that you can think about these as meaning making occurs whether we're talking about the standards in reading, writing, listening, speaking, or language. Language development occurs across all those strands of the standards. The content knowledge is crucial in all that we think about those themes that way, and how the ELD standards, parts 1 and part 2 and part 3 also are related to that. If I walk away, I'm in teacher prep, and I tell my students, if at the end of each day you walk away and you say, what did I do for meaning making today? What did I do to support foundational skills knowledge? What did I do to build content knowledge? What did I do to support language development? What did I do for meaning making, effective expression? And then of course we go into the meat of it, the bones of it, by looking through those standards, but recognizing it's those standards across all those strands. How did I ensure that my EL identified students were having the same equitable types of access? I just think it's an elegant way to think about implementation of a lot of standards.
Can I make another pitch that I forgot to add? If you are newer to the ELD standards, or if you're studying them still, because they're complex, just as the ELA literacy standards are, please keep returning to them. Chapter 5 of the ELD standards really kind of breaks down part two, learning about how English works. And of course, I'm sure you know that the ELD standards are intended to amplify the ELA literacy standards and to kind of make some specific things rise to the surface for you. So, as you're kind of developing, your own skills and your own knowledge and expertise in these areas, I would encourage you to go to chapter 5 and just kind of pick up a few ideas, like how to unpack sentences with kids, or how to talk about text structure and organization. It's throughout the framework, obviously, but this is really kind of specifically bringing home what part 2 of the ELD standards means. I know it's like the least familiar part of the ELD standards, and it can feel kind of uncomfortable and scary, but once you start embracing it, you'll never look at language the same way again.
Yeah. And I'll just add, chapter 1 of the framework provides an overview of the ELA literacy standards as well as the ELD standards, and discusses those two parts and helps us understand. And then going into the standards themselves is really beneficial.
And we have 2 questions in the chat. One I think we can answer right away. And
I'm answering one of them in writing, but Pam may want to add on to it. It's about designated
so there's that
ELD.
first one, but does your document offer a summary synopsis of each chapter? And there isn't a summary in the documents. They are resources, and they are organized according to. And I see Dr. Yop showing something.
This is.
Oh yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, this is the executive summary. So it's only about 30 pages, but it gives you just that real bird's eye view of the framework. So.
Oh, they're talking about that, Doc. I thought they were talking about the guidance document.
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, okay. Well, there's both.
Briefly, I think Nancy responded to the other question, which is really important. I want to make sure that I didn't miscommunicate, but I absolutely did not say that you shouldn't focus on foundational skills in kindergarten. You should absolutely focus on foundational skills in kindergarten. The question was around in designated ELD for EL identified students, should you use that precious specific time to focus on foundational skills? And the response is no. You should focus on foundational skills with EL identified students at other times during the day, but just not generally during designated ELD time.
And I thank you, Pam, for expanding on that. And I wanted to comment on what Hallie just said about the summary, because I think for those of you who might want to be sharing some things in your own faculty or with maybe the leaders in your district or school, the executive summary is a good tool because it does include an overview of the themes, of the circles of implementation, of the role of the standards, ELD integrated and designated, as well as a summary of each of the chapters. So that's a tool that can be very useful.
And I'm going to share also that if you go to our CDE literacy webpage, under resources, I'm going to just quickly share. Under resources, you will see like the newsletter, also related documents. So there's a number of related documents, and it includes the executive summary. So if you want to look for it, you can find it here. So thank you very much. We have reached our time, and I want to be mindful of your time. Thank you for spending this hour and 15 minutes with us, and we look forward to having you on for our next session in March. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.